Picture this exact moment unfolding in the heart of our family's Easter gathering inside that familiar old house on the outskirts of suburban Ohio, where the air always carried the comforting yet nostalgic scent of spring blossoms, mixed with the rich aroma of Mom's slow-roasted ham glazing in the oven for hours on end. And there I was, Emily Carter, pulling into the driveway in my reliable but unassuming sedan that had seen me through countless late nights debugging code at the office while everyone else chased after more visible symbols of success, like the gleaming SUVs my siblings preferred to flaunt as badges of their supposed achievements in the cutthroat world of American corporate life. As a 42-year-old woman who had quietly carved out a niche in the male-dominated field of cybersecurity, starting from those grueling entry-level positions right after my divorce when I was 35 and determined to rebuild without relying on anyone else's handouts or pity, I stepped out, feeling the weight of the day already pressing down, because Easter had always been our ritual of reconnection in this Midwest town where traditions like hunting for colorful eggs in the backyard as kids evolved into these adult gatherings filled with layered conversations that often masked deeper family tensions bubbling just beneath the surface of polite small talk and shared plates of deviled eggs topped with paprika that Mom insisted on making from scratch every year without fail. The house door swung open before I could even knock, revealing Mark, my older brother by 3 years, who had always positioned himself as the golden child with his sales job at a mid-sized software company in Chicago, where he chased commissions that allowed him to project an image of effortless prosperity. Greeting me with that booming voice and a clap on the back that landed a bit too forcefully, as if to remind me of his physical and metaphorical superiority in our sibling dynamic that stretched back to childhood days when he would tease me relentlessly about my love for computers while he basked in the attention of sports and social circles. Inside, the living room buzzed with the familiar chaos of extended family milling about. Cousins chasing after wide-eyed toddlers who darted between legs while Aunt Linda arranged platters of cheese puffs and crisp vegetable trays on the coffee table that had been in the family since the early 1980s, when life seemed simpler and dreams didn't come with the pressure of tech booms or economic uncertainties that hit so many of us in our age group between 35 and 65. Across the United States, where balancing careers and family often felt like walking a tightrope over a chasm of unmet expectations, I made my way through the crowd, hugging Grandma Ruth, who sat in her favorite recliner by the window overlooking the budding tulip garden that she tended with such care even now in her late 70s. Her sharp blue eyes locking onto mine as she pulled me close and murmured that I looked a touch weary from whatever battles I was fighting out there in the world. Her intuition always cutting straight to the core of things without needing the full story, because she had watched us all grow from those awkward teenage years into adults grappling with the realities of jobs that demanded everything and gave back just enough to keep you hooked. Settling into the worn armchair across from her, I listened as Mark dominated the conversation with animated tales of his latest sales triumph, exaggerating the details about closing a deal that supposedly netted him a 6-figure bonus, while the rest of us nodded along politely, knowing deep down that his stories often stretched the truth to fit the narrative of success he so desperately needed to maintain, especially after I had quietly overheard fragments of his tense phone calls during last year's Thanksgiving, when his side hustle in tech consulting nearly collapsed under unpaid invoices and demanding clients. The afternoon unfolded in that predictable rhythm of holiday preparations, with everyone eventually drifting toward the kitchen, where the savory smells intensified and plates of appetizers circulated freely, allowing for those casual exchanges that revealed glimpses of lives lived in parallel yet worlds apart, like when cousin Jenny shared updates on her thriving real estate business in nearby Cleveland that had weathered the housing market dips better than most, or Uncle Tom vented about skyrocketing gas prices affecting his trucking routes across the Midwest highways that connected our scattered family like invisible threads. Mark, ever the center of attention, turned his focus to me during a lull in the chatter, his eyebrow arching in that condescending way as he asked if I was still tinkering away at my little coding projects in what he dismissed as a hobby rather than a legitimate career path, implying with his tone that the tech industry reserved its real rewards for aggressive Types like him who networked at golf outings and closed deals over stakes rather than someone like me who preferred the solitude of algorithms and firewalls to the schmoozing he thrived on. The light laughter that rippled around the room stung more than I cared to admit because it echoed the underestimation I had faced not just from family, but from colleagues in Silicon Valley-inspired startups where women in tech often had to prove themselves twice over just to secure a seat at the table. Yet I held my tongue for the moment, offering a non-committal shrug and a sip of iced tea to buy time while inwardly calculating the risks of revealing too much too soon about the seismic shift happening in my professional life. As the group prepared to transition to the dining room for the main meal, my phone vibrated insistently in my pocket, pulling me aside to the quiet porch where the cool spring breeze rustled the leaves and carried faint echoes of neighborhood barbecues starting up down the street. A reminder of how these gatherings anchored us to the community rhythms that defined middle American life for folks our age who juggled mortgages, aging parents, and the relentless pursuit of stability in an era of rapid technological change. Answering the call from my boss, I listened with growing excitement to the confirmation that our small cybersecurity firm was on the verge of being acquired by a major player in the industry. A deal that would validate years of late nights fortifying digital defenses for corporations against the invisible threats that kept executives up at night. But as the words sank in, a wave of uncertainty washed over me because sharing this triumph here amid the familial judgments could either elevate my standing or ignite a powder keg of envy and resentment, particularly from Mark, whose own career teetered on less solid ground than he let on. Hanging up, I stared out at the horizon where the sun began its slow descent, pondering the delicate balance of holding onto this secret a little longer to let the moment ripen naturally, only to be interrupted by Mark's voice calling me back inside with a teasing edge that hinted at more probing questions to come, leaving me to wonder just how long I could navigate this gathering without the truth spilling out in ways that would alter everything forever. With the appetizers mostly devoured and the kitchen humming with the sounds of final preparations for the main course, we all migrated back to the dining room where the long oak table had been set with Mom's heirloom china that she dusted off once a year for these occasions, creating that sense of continuity amid the changes that life inevitably brought to a family like ours scattered across the Midwest with jobs pulling us in different directions while holidays like Easter served as anchors to remind us of the roots we shared in this unpretentious Ohio suburb where neighbors still waved from porches and community meant showing up with a covered dish no matter how hectic your week had been. Mom led the group in a brief prayer before we dug in, her voice steady but tinged with the emotion that always surfaced since Dad's passing 2 years earlier when a sudden heart attack had left a void that no amount of family gatherings could fully fill. And as heads bowed over plates laden with slices of honey-glazed ham accompanied by scalloped potatoes bubbling with cheese and green beans simmered in bacon fat, just the way tradition demanded, I felt a pang of nostalgia mixed with the undercurrent of tension that Mark's presence always stirred up because he had a way of turning even these sacred moments into subtle battlegrounds where his narratives of success overshadowed everyone else's quieter paths. Seated directly across from him under the glow of the chandelier that had witnessed decades of similar meals, I picked at my food while he launched into yet another embellished account of his recent sales victory at the software firm in Chicago, describing how he had charmed a skeptical client into signing on for a multi-year contract that he claimed would line his pockets with enough to finally upgrade his boat, or maybe even that cabin up north he always talked about, his gestures expansive as if he were still in the boardroom pitching to venture capitalists rather than surrounded by relatives who knew the real story involved more luck and persistence than he admitted. The conversation flowed around his monologue, with the usual mix of admiring nods from Uncle Tom, who saw echoes of his own blue-collar grit in Mark's tales, and sympathetic murmurs from Aunt Linda, who had always favored the outgoing sibling in our dynamic. But when Mark finally turned his attention to me midway through chewing a mouthful of ham, his eyes narrowing with that familiar mix of curiosity and condescension, he leaned forward and asked in a voice dripping with feigned brotherly concern whether I was still messing around with those computer glitches at my so-called startup job. Implying through his choice of words that the tech world I inhabited was some amateur playground far removed from the high-stakes arena he navigated daily, where deals rose and fell on handshakes and intuition rather than lines of code that no one outside the industry could appreciate. The ripple of light laughter that spread around the table hit me like a familiar wave, one that carried echoes of childhood taunts when he would mock my fascination with early personal computers in the basement while he scored touchdowns on the high school field. And even now, as a woman in her early 40s who had bootstrapped her way through community college night classes and relentless self-study to become a lead engineer in cybersecurity protecting sensitive data for major corporations, I could see in his expression the same dismissal that society often leveled at women who dared to excel in fields dominated by men, making me question for a split second if holding back my own achievements was an act of grace or just self-preservation in a family that thrived on surface-level comparisons. Instead of letting the barb sink too deep, I met his gaze with a composed smile and countered by saying that my work involved untangling far more complex knots than his sales scripts ever touched. Like the time I had traced a potential breach through layers of encrypted networks that could have cost a client millions if left unchecked, adding with a touch of wry humor that it was a bit like debugging one of his overblown pitches where the flaws hid in plain sight until someone with the right tools exposed them, which elicited a genuine chuckle from the group and left Mark's cheeks coloring slightly as he shifted in his seat, the sting of my witty retort landing just sharply enough to even the score without escalating into outright confrontation. As the plates began to clear and seconds were offered around with offers of more of the buttery dinner rolls that Mom baked from a recipe passed down from her own mother, I excused myself to help in the kitchen where the steam from dishwater provided a momentary shield from the dining room's intensity, and, while scrubbing a stubborn spot on a serving platter, I overheard Mark's voice from the adjacent hallway engaged in what sounded like a heated phone call with one of his business associates, his tone urgent and laced with frustration as he haggled over delayed payments and looming deadlines for his side consulting gig that he kept hidden from the family to preserve his image of unassailable competence. That revelation twisted something inside me because it highlighted the fragility of the pedestal he had built for himself, contrasting sharply with the solid ground I had gained through years of methodical progress in a career that demanded precision over charisma, and suddenly a dilemma presented itself in stark terms. Should I confront him privately with an offer of genuine advice drawn from my own network of contacts who could potentially steer his faltering venture back on course, thereby extending an olive branch that might mend our fractured sibling bond, or allow the evening to proceed with him none the wiser, risking that his mounting pressures would spill over into more pointed attacks that could sour the entire holiday for everyone involved? Drying my hands on a faded towel that still bore the faint scent of lavender from Grandma's sachets, I caught my reflection in the darkened window above the sink, seeing not just the lines of fatigue from long hours at the keyboard, but the resolve of someone who had learned to navigate underestimation as a form of armor, ultimately deciding to test the waters with a subtle intervention later if the opportunity arose without forcing the issue prematurely. Returning to the table where dessert preparations were underway with slices of warm apple pie being portioned out alongside scoops of vanilla ice cream that began to melt into sweet pools on the plates, the atmosphere lightened momentarily as wine glasses were refilled and stories shifted to lighter fare like recollections of past Easters when we were young and the world seemed full of endless possibilities before adult responsibilities complicated everything. But Grandma Ruth's voice cut through the reminiscing with a deliberate clarity as she passed me a napkin and said that families often underwent surprising transformations these days, with mergers and acquisitions reshaping not just companies, but the very foundations of how siblings viewed each other after years of parallel lives diverging in unexpected ways. Mark dismissed her observation with a casual joke about corporate giants swallowing up the little guys being nothing new in the cutthroat landscape he claimed to master. Yet, her words lingered in the air like a planted seed, stirring a subtle unease in me because I wondered if she had gleaned hints of my impending acquisition from some offhand remark or perhaps even a news snippet that escaped my careful containment of the secret. And as he raised his glass in a toast to resilience and future wins, with his eyes locking onto mine in a challenge that spoke volumes about the unresolved rivalry simmering between us, I realized that the shadows of our shared history were lengthening across the table, pulling us toward a confrontation that neither of us could avoid much longer without the entire fragile equilibrium of the evening shattering under the weight of truths waiting to surface. As the apple pie slices disappeared amid the satisfied sighs and the faint clinking of forks against plates that evoked memories of countless similar desserts shared in this very dining room over the years, Aunt Linda decided it was the perfect time to unearth the old family photo album from its resting place on the sideboard, where it had gathered a thin layer of dust since the last reunion. Flipping through its pages with enthusiasm that pulled everyone back into the softer edges of our shared past, while the evening's earlier tensions lingered like unspoken afterthoughts in the warm glow of the overhead light. The album's yellowed snapshots captured us in simpler times. From muddy Easter egg hunts in the backyard, where Mark and I would compete fiercely for the golden prize hidden by Dad, to awkward group poses at church socials dressed in pastel outfits that now seemed comically outdated against the backdrop of our adult lives marked by mortgages, career ladders, and the quiet regrets that come with turning 40 in a country where success often felt measured by visible milestones rather than the internal victories won in solitude. Mark took charge of the browsing as he always did, his finger jabbing at images of his Little League triumphs and high school football glory, while barely acknowledging the pages filled with my academic awards or the science fair ribbons I had earned back when computers were still novelties in our household, turning the nostalgic exercise into another platform for his self-aggrandizement that grated against the reality of my own journey, where I had transformed that early curiosity into a cybersecurity expertise that safeguarded digital empires for clients spanning the American heartland to coastal tech hubs. Grandma Ruth, ever the quiet observer with her keen insight honed from decades of mediating family squabbles in this modest Ohio home, reached across the table to turn to a particular spread showing Mark and me as teenagers side by side at a summer fair. Her voice gentle yet probing as she remarked that we had once been inseparable allies in navigating the uncertainties of growing up in a working-class family where dreams were tempered by practicality, wondering aloud what might have happened if our paths had crossed more frequently in adulthood rather than diverging into these parallel worlds of sales charisma and technical precision that now defined us both. That comment stirred a flood of recollections in me, resurfacing the raw vulnerability of confiding in him during my early 20s about pursuing a computer science degree against the odds after our parents expressed doubts about its stability for a woman starting late, only for him to brush it off as a risky whim while he chased his own ambitions in business school, funded partly by the savings I had scrimped together from part-time jobs. A betrayal that had planted seeds of distance I was only now reconsidering in the midst of this holiday gathering, where the lines between old wounds and present opportunities blurred under the weight of familial expectation. The dilemma intensified when cousin Sarah, who had always been the empathetic ear in our extended circle with her own history of career pivots, from teaching to freelance design in the fluctuating Columbus market, pulled me aside during a brief lull for coffee refills in the kitchen, her whisper carrying the weight of insider knowledge as she mentioned overhearing industry buzz about instability at Mark's firm and asked if my connections in tech could offer a discreet lifeline without appending the evening's fragile harmony, forcing me to weigh the merits of anonymous assistance that might preserve our sibling tie against the satisfaction of letting his overconfidence unravel naturally. Opting for a path that balanced empathy with self-protection, I returned to the table where the photo session had evolved into broader reminiscences, and as Mark boasted about an upcoming pitch he swore would catapult his consulting side to new heights, I interjected with a measured anecdote drawn from our childhood that highlighted his pattern of overpromising, saying it reminded me of the family trivia night years ago when he had declared victory prematurely only to falter on basic questions about our own history, much like how assumptions in the tech realm could crumble under scrutiny if not backed by solid foundations. A clever analogy that framed my retort as lighthearted wisdom while subtly undermining his narrative and drawing appreciative smiles from the group, including a subtle nod from Grandma that made the moment of revenge feel both justified and elegantly contained. That exchange left me reflecting on whether such restrained responses truly empowered me or merely prolonged the cycle of underappreciation I had endured from boardrooms to family tables, where women like me in our age bracket often navigated success through subtlety rather than spectacle. Yet, it also amplified the internal conflict over how much of my own story to reveal, especially with the acquisition looming like a hidden ace that could redefine not just my career, but the entire dynamic at play here amid the remnants of pie crust and cooling coffee cups. With dessert fully savored and the energy of the room beginning to wane toward evening games for the younger ones, the conversations splintered into intimate clusters while I lingered near the buffet replenishing my drink, only for Mark to approach with a purposeful stride that closed the space between us, his expression hardening into one of direct confrontation as he questioned in a lowered tone why I kept my professional life so shrouded in vagueness, accusing me of hiding behind some dead-end role because I lacked the grit to compete in the genuine leagues he dominated with his network of high-powered contacts. His words cut through the holiday veneer like a sudden chill, resurrecting every instance of dismissal from our shared history, including the time after my divorce when he had suggested I pivot to something more traditional rather than doubling down on tech, igniting a firestorm of doubt about whether to unleash the full truth of my impending triumph right there and watch his empire of ego collapse, or maintain the composure that had carried me this far at the risk of enduring one more layer of belittlement that might push me beyond restraint. The dining area hummed on with oblivious chatter, children laughing over scattered game pieces and adults trading work anecdotes, but Grandma's gaze found mine from across the room, steady and enigmatic as if she intuited the brewing tempest. And in that suspended instant, Sarah's phone chimed with a notification that drew her eyes to the screen before flicking toward me with a mix of surprise and confirmation, the subtle intrusion of external news hinting that the barriers around my secret were thinning faster than anticipated and propelling the evening toward an inevitable crossroads where revelations could either heal or fracture the bonds we had gathered to celebrate. In the wake of Sarah's phone notification that had momentarily pierced the veil of our family bubble with its insistent chime echoing softly against the walls of the dining room where remnants of dessert plates still cluttered the table and the scent of cinnamon lingered heavily in the air like an unspoken promise of further revelations waiting to unfold, the atmosphere thickened with an undercurrent of curiosity that pulled eyes toward her screen before they inevitably settled on me, Emily Carter. As if the device itself had summoned the invisible threads connecting my hidden professional world to this intimate Ohio gathering where Easter traditions clashed against the modern realities of ambition and rivalry that defined so many lives in our demographic of midlife Americans navigating careers alongside the pull of familial obligations. Mark, sensing the shift in energy like a salesman attuned to a room's mood swings, paused in his distribution of after-dinner mints from the crystal dish Grandma kept for special occasions and fixed his gaze on Sarah with a forced casualness that masked the growing unease etching lines around his eyes, asking what kind of alert could possibly interrupt our evening reminiscences about childhood escapades in the neighborhood parks, where we had once built forts from fallen branches and dreamed of futures unburdened by the economic pressures that now shaped every decision from job choices to holiday budgets. Sarah, ever quick to smooth ruffled feathers in her role as the family's unofficial diplomat with her background in community outreach programs back in Cleveland, glanced up with a hesitant smile and murmured something about a business headline catching her eye in the news feed she followed for her freelance design clients who often needed updates on tech trends affecting digital marketing. But her words trailed off as she shot me another look laden with unspoken confirmation that the acquisition buzz surrounding my cybersecurity firm had indeed escaped into the wider world, forcing me to recalibrate my strategy in this delicate dance of disclosure amid the clatter of children resetting the board game on the floor and adults refilling coffee mugs with the steam rising like tentative peace offerings. That subtle intrusion amplified the internal dilemma churning within me as I stood by the buffet table pretending to rearrange the wilting flower centerpiece Mom had picked from the garden that morning. Weighing the pros and cons of intervening in Mark's precarious professional situation now that his earlier confrontation had left a raw edge to our interaction. Because extending a hand with targeted advice from my network of industry contacts could potentially stabilize his consulting venture, teetering on the brink of failure as evidenced by those hallway phone snippets I had overheard. Yet it risked diluting the poetic justice of his impending comeuppance when the full truth of my success emerged to eclipse his bluster in front of everyone we held dear. The choice felt heavier in this moment of suspended animation where the room's conversations had splintered into quieter murmurs about everything from rising healthcare costs for folks our age to the latest neighborhood gossip about a couple down the street facing foreclosure after a job loss in the auto sector. Realities that resonated deeply with the audience of everyday Americans between 35 and 65 who understood the fragility of hard-won stability in a nation where one merger or market shift could upend years of effort. Ultimately, I settled on a compromise that allowed me to offer value without fully exposing my leverage. Slipping a casual comment to Mark during a brief porch interlude where the cooling evening air carried hints of blooming lilacs from the yard, and we both stepped out for a breath away from the indoor clamor, suggesting he look into emerging cybersecurity protocols for his pitches since they were becoming non-negotiable in client contracts these days, framing it as sisterly insight gleaned from general reading rather than the frontline expertise that had positioned my firm as an attractive acquisition target for his very own employer. Emboldened by that small act of outreach which left Mark nodding thoughtfully while inwardly I savored the irony of guiding him toward tools that unknowingly bolstered my own impending victory, we re-entered the house where the group had settled into a loose circle for after-dinner drinks on the living room sofas that sagged comfortably under the weight of decades of family lore. The amber glow of table lamps casting long shadows that mirrored the lengthening uncertainties of the night as laughter punctuated tales of past holidays gone awry like the year a spring storm flooded the basement during our Easter brunch forcing everyone into raincoats for egg hunts in the downpour. Mark, reclaiming his spot as storyteller with a refreshed glass of bourbon in hand that he swirled absent-mindedly, pivoted the discussion back to career conquests by regaling the room with details of his latest high-stakes negotiation, emphasizing the adrenaline of sealing deals that shaped industry landscapes. While subtly circling back to probe my reticence about my own role, his tone laced with that persistent undercurrent of superiority that had defined our interactions since he first outshone me in school presentations. Seizing the opening to deliver a sharper yet humorous counter without derailing the evening's harmony, I leaned forward with a conspiratorial grin and remarked that his tales reminded me of our family's infamous fishing expedition up at Lake Erie when he had bragged about landing the biggest catch only for the line to snap under the weight of his overconfidence, much like how unseen vulnerabilities in a pitch could unravel even the sturdiest plans if not vetted by someone who spotted the weak links early. The analogy landing with a ripple of appreciative chuckles that flushed his face a deeper shade and momentarily silenced his retorts, providing that satisfying twinge of revenge through wit that felt all the more potent because it echoed the clever maneuvers I employed daily in fortifying digital barriers against threats far more insidious than sibling rivalry. Yet, even as the group absorbed the levity of my retort with nods and refills of their drinks, the undercurrents of conflict continued to build like storm clouds gathering over the familiar rooftops visible through the window panes fogged slightly from the warmth inside, with Mom casting occasional worried glances my way as if sensing the emotional undercurrents rippling beneath the surface banter and Uncle Tom muttering half-jokingly about how egos in the workplace mirrored those at family tables where everyone claimed the high ground until reality intervened. The boiling point crested unexpectedly during a lull when Jenny, distracted by her own phone notifications amid the casual scroll many of us indulged in during these lulls, let slip a comment about seeing something in the headlines regarding a notable buyout in the tech sector that involved a promising cybersecurity outfit making waves for its innovative defenses against data breaches plaguing corporations across the Midwest and beyond. her words hanging in the air like a lit fuse as forks paused midair and conversation stuttered to a halt with eyes turning toward me in dawning realization. Mark's expression froze in a mask of incredulity, his glass hovering forgotten as the implication sank in that the vague professional veil I had maintained throughout the day was thinning under the weight of public knowledge, while Grandma Ruth's subtle inclination of her head from her recliner conveyed a quiet acknowledgement of the moment she had perhaps anticipated all along, propelling the entire gathering into a suspended hush where the threshold of revelation loomed just one breath away from shattering the evening's fragile equilibrium forever. Jenny's offhand remark about the tech buyout lingered in the suddenly still air of the living room where the board game pieces lay forgotten on the carpet amid scattered coasters and half-empty coffee mugs that had cooled during the evening's winding conversations, drawing every pair of eyes toward me in a collective moment of dawning awareness that transformed the cozy post-dinner haze into something charged with the electricity of impending discovery, as if the very walls of our family home in this quiet Ohio suburb had absorbed the tensions of the day and now amplified them through the silence that followed her words about innovative cybersecurity firms reshaping the industry landscape in ways that echoed the personal ambitions and hidden struggles so many of us in our midlife years across America grappled with daily. Mark's face, usually animated with the confidence of a seasoned salesman who had talked his way out of countless tight spots in Chicago boardrooms, contorted into a rigid mask of disbelief as he slowly lowered his bourbon glass to the side table with a deliberate clink that resonated like a punctuation mark in the hush, his eyes locking onto mine with a mixture of accusation and confusion that stripped away the veneer of brotherly banter we had maintained throughout the afternoon, forcing me to confront the culmination of years of subtle dismissals from him about my career choices in a field he had long dismissed as unsuitable for someone with my background of starting over after divorce and building from the ground up without the safety nets he had always taken for granted. Sarah shifted uncomfortably on the sofa beside her husband, her earlier text about the buzz now manifesting in this public unraveling that she hadn't intended to ignite, while Uncle Tom let out a low whistle that broke the initial freeze just enough to draw murmurs from Aunt Linda and the cousins who exchanged glances heavy with the realization that family secrets, much like corporate mergers, could upend the status quo without warning in these gatherings meant to foster unity amid the scattering influences of jobs and geographies that pulled us apart over time. The weight of that suspended moment pressed on me heavily as I sat there on the edge of the armchair, my mind racing through the final threads of the dilemma that had shadowed the entire day, weighing whether to seize this opportunity to lay bare the full extent of my professional ascent from those grueling entry-level debugging shifts in dimly lit offices to leading a team whose innovations had caught the eye of industry giants, potentially forging a path toward reconciliation by demonstrating that success in tech didn't require the aggressive posturing Mark embodied, but rather the persistent grit that had defined my journey through boardroom biases and late-night code refinements. Yet, even as vindication tempted me like the last slice of pie cooling on the sideboard, a deeper hesitation rooted in the love that bound us despite the rivalry surfaced, reminding me of Mom's quiet pleas for harmony in the wake of Dad's absence and the way Grandma Ruth's presence had always steadied us through storms of disagreement, making me question if shattering Mark's ego here among relatives who cherished him as the charismatic leader would heal old rifts or carve new ones that echoed the divisions in so many American families where career envy simmered beneath holiday cheer. Before I could formulate a response that balanced truth with tact, Grandma Ruth straightened in her recliner with the poise of someone who had navigated far greater family tempests over her 70-plus years, her voice cutting through the tension with the precision of a well-honed knife, as she declared that it was indeed peculiar how Mark's company had just announced the acquisition of my modest cybersecurity outfit in the morning edition of the local business section. She perused with her coffee each day, her words landing like a perfectly timed revelation that confirmed the whispers and alerts floating through the room without my direct intervention. The room plunged into an even deeper silence following Grandma's statement, The kind that swallows sound and leaves only the faint ticking of the grandfather clock in the hallway to mark the passage of shock rippling across faces from Mom's wide-eyed surprise at the head of the table to the children's puzzled pauses in their game, all while Mark's fork, or rather his glass, remained frozen mid-motion as if time itself had halted to underscore the poetic reversal of our sibling fortunes where his mockery of my capabilities now reflected back on him through the lens of this corporate twist that positioned my quiet achievements as the linchpin of his own firm's expansion strategy. That instant of reckoning delivered a profound satisfaction deep within me, a witty form of revenge woven not from confrontation but from the elegant irony of circumstances aligning to expose the undercurrents of underestimation I had endured from playground taunts to professional sidelining, feeling the warmth of validation spread like the earlier dessert's comfort without the need for raised voices or pointed accusations that might have alienated the very people whose approval I still craved in this tapestry of blood ties. Laughter eventually bubbled up from the edges of the group, starting with Uncle Tom's hearty guffaw that proclaimed the situation as one for the ages and spreading to tentative smiles around the circle, but Mark remained statue still, his expression a complex mosaic of embarrassment, resentment, and perhaps the dawning of reluctant respect that flickered in his eyes as he processed how my path, once belittled as a mere hobby, had intersected with his world in a way that elevated us both yet humbled him most acutely in front of witnesses to his lifelong narrative of superiority. As the evening gradually dissolved into awkward exchanges of congratulations, mixed with questions about the deal's details that I answered in measured tones to preserve some semblance of normalcy, hugs were distributed with a stiffness born of the upheaval and promises of follow-up calls echoed hollowly while I helped clear the last of the dishes in the kitchen where the suds in the sink provided a mundane counterpoint to the emotional whirlwind just navigated. Lingering on the porch afterward with Grandma under the canopy of stars emerging over the neighborhood rooftops that silhouetted familiar houses much like the ones where viewers of this story might gather their own families, she placed a reassuring hand on my arm and advised that while the moment's triumph was well-earned, the intricacies of family loyalties often proved more enduring than any business merger, urging me not to let this singular victory overshadow the broader tapestry of connections that sustained us through life's uncertainties. Driving home along those winding suburban roads under the vast Midwestern sky, the glow of the acquisition's implications dimmed slightly by the open-ended questions it raised about whether Mark would bridge the gap with genuine outreach or allow pride to fester into lasting distance. And if my choice to withhold the full reveal until fate intervened had been an act of wisdom or merely another deferral of confrontation, leaving me to ponder the true cost of success in a world where personal triumphs inevitably rippled through the intimate spheres of home and heart without ever providing tidy resolutions.